Whether bought via IsraelBonds.com or offline, individual and institutional investors alike demonstrate pride in a nation that has turned a barren desert green, cemented its stature as a cutting-edge technology leader, welcomed over 3 million immigrants from nearly 100 countries, produced 12 Nobel Prize laureates, and dispatched first responders throughout the world.
Coming up in today's newscast, the IDF demolishes the home of the Barkan Industrial Park terrorist, social workers across the country strike against violence and poor conditions in the workplace, and Israel reveals its latest plans to become a quantum technology superpower. Late on Sunday evening, IDF forces began the demolition of the home of Ashraf Na'alwa, aka the Barkan terrorist. Na'alwa shot dead 2 of his co-workers in the Barkan Industrial Park on October 7th, Kim Levringon Yecheskel and Ziv Hajbi. He was then finally caught and killed on December 13th after over 2 months at large. According to the IDF, he was also reportedly planning a second attack. This comes after a week of multiple attacks and IDF response operations in the West Bank as well, including 2 drive-by shootings, a stabbing, and an attempted car ramming. 2 soldiers and a newborn baby were killed, and several others were seriously injured. On a related note, after weeks of investigation, Israeli security officials have concluded that an attack in Eilat last month between a Jordanian man and 2 Israelis was also in fact a terror attack. The Shin Bet reportedly found that the Jordanian national who had been working in Eilat for a few days prior to the attack was nationalistically motivated when he seriously wounded his 2 Israeli co-workers using a hammer. A second Jordanian worker was also wounded trying to stop the attack. Israeli officials have vowed harsh responses, with Prime Minister Netanyahu promising that attackers of Israel will pay with their lives. And this latest demolition also comes just a few days after the demolition of the home of Islam Abu Hamaid, who killed IDF Sergeant Ronen Lubarsky in Ramallah last May. Still, many even within the coalition are calling for more. Speaking at a protest earlier this week outside the Prime Minister's residence, Education Minister Naftali Bennett said, quote, "I call on the Prime Minister, if you make a promise, keep it," end quote. For example, Bennett explained that, quote, "We are tired of promises. The Prime Minister promised that terrorists' homes would be demolished within 48 hours, but they have yet to demolish the homes of Ari Fold's murderers and the murderers of the soldiers in Givat Asaf," end quote. Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, Agriculture Minister Uri Ariel, Economy Minister Eli Cohen, and multiple others were also in attendance. All right, now with an eye for heightened punishments for terrorism, a newly suggested bill that would exile and relocate the families of terrorists has just been approved by a cabinet committee. It will now go to the Knesset floor for continued discussion. And according to reports, if passed, the bill would enable Israel to forcibly remove Palestinian terrorists' families from their homes and relocate them elsewhere in the West Bank. Critics, rights activists, and legal experts have all denounced the suggested legislation, but Education Minister Bennett and Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked are pushing for debate to continue nonetheless. Additionally, while punishing terrorists and their families, the Knesset Finance Committee is today scheduled to review a series of measures intending to compensate businesses, employees, and families in southern Israel near the Gaza border. One measure would calculate and compensate southern businesses for their losses in revenue caused by Hamas's terror, while another would consider adding Gaza perimeter communities to an already existing list of cities and settlements that receive compensation for indirect damages. Returning now to the studio with more on Israel's response to the recent wave of terror last week is legal advisor to the Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy, or Meshilut, attorney Simcha Rotman. Simcha, thank you so much for coming back in today.
Good day.
All right, so first of all, what's your initial reaction to the recent demolitions or maybe the lack thereof, and this latest push to exile terrorists even?
We see the idea. We see a lot of talk, even from the Prime Minister, that to say that there are legal obstacles to doing what Israel thinks needs to be done. If we're talking about house demolition or we're talking about exile terrorists' families. The idea of legal obstacles to saving or to preventing terror attacks, I don't understand it. I don't understand how can people say that there are legal obstacles to protect your own people. The main goal of a country, the main goal of government at all, is to protect its citizens. So we can say we don't want to do something because it's immoral.
Sure, but the idea, which again, I'm playing from the legal position, wouldn't the idea then be to, protect citizens' rights, but not at the expense of someone else's?
Of course, if you can, but if the prime minister gets to a decision saying the only way to prevent terrorist attacks is to exile terrorist families.
How would you do that anyway? Where would you move them to?
So the idea now in the current law that the government approved this Sunday, the idea now is to move them to from a place to a place inside Judea and Samaria, meaning, and that it's a harsh enough punishment, and it's a deterrence.
How can Israel even really do that, though? How can you control to that extent where these people
Israel
live?
has control, and even had before and have today. You can say a specific person cannot be in the Nablus area, cannot be in Hebron area. You can do that.
So it's not that they're saying, hey, I want you to live in this specific area from now on.
You can do even that. But I'm talking about exiling them from there. And in the society that lives in Judea and Samaria, it's a big deterrent to say you cannot stay in your house. But the idea is that the law is preventing the government from protecting its own citizens is, you cannot grasp this idea. You cannot accept, if there is a problem with the law, you change the law. To say that the law prevents the government from protecting its citizens is an oxymoron. The idea of a government, the idea of a state is to protect its citizens. If the law is preventing, then the law is bad.
Okay, but so if we're talking about deterrence then, again, and this is my final question, unfortunately, but earlier today, the police also arrested a suspect in a hate crime from last Thursday in which a Israeli settler attacked a Palestinian bus driver in Modi'in Illit. Would you suggest anywhere near the same punishment for him?
If I would think that you need this, we might consider it.
To relocate him, to exile the settler
I have to say, not many people know, but many Jewish settlers get this kind of decisions from the ruler of Judea and Samaria. You cannot live in this and this area. So it happens as we speak. But I think that the idea to compare these issues, I think it's wrong. We are talking about when you have a fight, a battle between nations, you deal with it in the rules of war. When you have a criminal, you deal with the justice criminal system. The fact that we are trying to fight terror using the criminal system corrupts both of our criminal system and the way we fight terror. You need to fight terror like you fight terror. You need to do criminal justice in the criminal justice way.
All right, well, Simcha Rotman, thank you very much for coming in. Meanwhile, the Israeli Social Workers Union suspended all welfare services throughout the country today as part of a nationwide strike, both in protest of violence targeting welfare workers and in protest of overall poor working conditions. The social workers are calling for urgent reforms to ensure the protection of employees, higher salaries, and overall improved work environments. Currently, social service workers claim that they are overworked, underpaid, and subject to violence on a daily basis in their line of work, and the social workers are not the only group protesting either. In related news, the Yellow Vest protests seen in France have finally reached Israel too. On Friday, social protesters donned similarly iconic yellow vests and took to the streets of Tel Aviv in demonstrations against massive scheduled price increases for water, electricity, and food. All but one of Israel's 10 biggest food and household goods producers have announced an increase in prices, with Israeli brand Osem even announcing this week that it will increase prices for about a third of its products over the coming year. As for electricity prices, they're expected to rise between 6% and 8% beginning January 1st, with water prices expected to rise by at least 4.5% as well. Additionally, municipal taxes are expected to rise, and even mobile phone companies have announced intended price hikes in their monthly plans. To make matters worse, several economists, analysts, and legal experts have all studied the planned changes in taxes and pricing and concluded that price hikes are actually likely to rise by 3 to 4% more than are currently reported by the government. Joining me now with more on the social protests that have hit Israel over the last few days is ILTV's Lidar Gavelazi. Now, Lidar, okay, what else can you tell me about these protests?
Well, the protests come in the wake of basically what's going to be widespread rises in the cost of living for food, gas, water, electricity, sort of across the board. The protests have kind of taken their inspiration from France, where we've seen the Yellow Vest protests, and they decided to bring that to Israel to try and re-spark, let's say, the massive protests from 2011.
So, okay, expand a little bit about the 2011 protests.
So the 2011 protests began with one young girl, Daphne Leaf. She set up a tent in the middle of Tel Aviv's Habima Square, protesting the high cost of housing in Israel, saying she couldn't afford an apartment, couldn't afford to buy an apartment. And soon enough, the National Union of Israeli Students joined her, and the protest just kind of blew up. And we saw protests in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square, which brought hundreds of thousands of Israelis from around the country, and really trying, to make a change in the high cost of living.
I know a lot of people are very critical of those protests too, though, because the cost of living is still an ongoing issue, really across the board, and now even more so. So what was the outcome of those protests? Because they're not going out anymore. Right.
So following the 2011 protest, we did see a few things coming out of that. We had the Trachtenberg Committee, which made recommendations across a number of fields in Israeli society. One of the main things to come out of there was that we had a free education for children from 3 years and up. And people have become, I think Israelis have become a lot more conscious of their buying habits, and the major food companies have become a lot more hesitant in raising prices. And that's why this protests that we're seeing now have the potential to really sort of become a big thing. There's been a lot of attempts to try and sort of re-spark the 2011 protests. Nothing has been successful so far.
But this could be.
This could be, absolutely, because we're seeing, 9 out of 10 of Israel's major food corporations are raising their prices. Tnuva, which part of the reason for their rise in cottage cheese, for example, sparked the 2011 protests, are now raising the prices of their food for the first time since 2011.
Oh, wow. Okay,
and
so we're seeing a lot of and then Osem as well, like we spoke about in the last story, and all of this in ahead of the 2019 campaign. So I'm sure that this is going to come back in full force, and everyone across the political spectrum will probably be bouncing off of this issue.
Well, yeah, this is something that we'll definitely have to closely monitor and see, if this becomes an issue. I think it will be an issue in the coming election. Absolutely.
All right, Lidal, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Aaron.
The Prime Minister's son, Yair Netanyahu, is in hot water again today, following reports that social media giant Facebook has suspended his account. After a string of terror attacks the week before, Yair posted that, quote, peace will never be reached with the human monsters which have been dubbed Palestinians since 1964, end quote. Facebook has since removed the post and temporarily banned Netanyahu from the platform. Yair, in response, accused Facebook of being, quote, radical thought police. It's not clear yet exactly which post caused Facebook to bar Yair from his account, though, as just a few days earlier, the Prime Minister's son wrote that either all Jews will have to leave Israel or all Muslims, but, quote, I prefer the second option, end quote. And Yair has been blocked multiple times from Facebook as well over similar posts in the past. Further, after his initial post was removed last week, Yair wrote again on Facebook that Facebook was, quote, trying to shut our mouths in the only place we have the right to express our opinions, end quote. He then also included a screenshot of the originally removed post in violation of Facebook's community policy. Netanyahu seemed to believe it was the criticism of Facebook itself, though, that finally tipped the scales. Taking to Twitter, Yair wrote, quote, unbelievable. Facebook blocks me for 24 hours for simply criticizing it, end quote. He also accused Facebook of hypocrisy, as there are, quote, endless pages calling for the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews, thousands of violent and extreme left-wing posts against me and my family, including threats of physical violence and immoral murder threats, yet all of these do not violate Facebook's rules, end quote. Facebook has not yet been reached for comment. After over 600 years, Spanish Jews were finally able to return to prayer in what was once the main synagogue in Toledo, marking an historic move of fraternity between Jews and Christians in Spain. The site welcomed a Hebrew service, and ILTV's Joy Gavijon is here with the story. Joy, tell us more about this.
Thanks, Aaron. So as you said, we're talking about what it used to be the main congregation, the Congregational Synagogue of Toledo in Spain. And this synagogue worked as the main place for Jews to pray and study Torah for 211 years. But after the pogrom that took place in 1391, it was expropriated and transformed into the Church of Saint Mary the White.
So you're talking about like the Spanish Inquisition and such.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so this is when Jews were being persecuted really across the whole
yes.
Spanish Empire. Yeah.
Yes, you said it. Until today, the building belongs to the Catholic Church and works as a museum that is open to the public with cultural and educational activities for everyone who can go. But
all right. So I can only imagine kind of how special this must have been for all the many Spanish Jews who were able to be there again.
yes, it was actually very moving, and especially because it happened as the result of Christian and Jewish joint efforts. So the Hispanic Jewish Foundation to work together with the Bishop of Toledo in order to go back to the roots and act in an act of friendship, allow a Jewish service in the synagogue. The historic event took place last Tuesday and gathered people from both Jewish and Christian faith.
And so who was invited to the ceremony?
Well, many officials, of course, and among them the mayor of Toledo, Milagros Tolón, the president of the Hispanic Jewish Foundation, David Hatchwell Altaras, and the president of the Spanish Rabbinical Corps, Rabbi Moshe Ben Dahan, who actually offered some prayers. But also the audience could enjoy a short concert, but very nice, from the Israeli singer Ahinoam Nini, who closed the ceremony.
A beautiful singer. I love
yes,
Ahinoam.
she's really good.
So what do we know? Like, what's going to happen with the synagogue now? You know, because I mean, the building still belongs to the church, right?
Right. Well, look, the Federation of Jewish Communities in Spain has been pushing the Spanish government and the Catholic Church for a long time now. They want them to come up with some kind of restitution plan for the building. But the synagogue was built in the 13th century, and it's one of the oldest structures of its type. So that being said, I want to say that this was a big step, but I'm sure that the Jewish community will still try to claim the property and push for it.
We'll have to see if that goes anywhere. Until then, thank you for your report, Joy.
Of course, Aaron.
Massive plans for 5 luxury apartment buildings and a park in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Abu Tor were rescinded this week for reasons still unknown. That being said, while the public objection period has not yet started, the proposal for the area, also known as the Hill of Evil Council, was opposed by practically everyone on the ground. Abu Tor, which lies just south of the Old City, was recently purchased from the Greek Orthodox Church by Michael Steinhardt, David Sofer, and a number of other anonymous investors as part of a series of deals the church wanted to help pay off earlier debts. Additionally, the area is one of only a few left undeveloped near Jerusalem, and there have been many unsuccessful attempts to build there in the past. But archaeologists and residents both condemned the plans ahead of public hearings, primarily because very little has been excavated in the area that's likely rife with history. They don't know who their new landowners are. They don't know the terms of their new potential leases. The government is trying to muscle in through a still unsuccessful bill aimed at preventing any private owners from controlling too much of Jerusalem anyway, and all the while, property values are plummeting. As of now, it's been reported that a new architect is being sought by the developers and that new plans from scratch will then be submitted, but unfortunately, that hasn't yet been confirmed either. All right, moving on, the Israeli Defense Ministry has just announced a 100 million shekel investment into the research and development of quantum computing. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Innovative Research Fund will keep Israel at the top of global technology, intelligence, and research. This latest investment, announced as a partnership between the Defense Ministry, the Higher Education Committee, and the Israel Science Foundation, would drastically enhance Israel's abilities to decrypt secret messages, perform calculations at a much, much faster rate, and in general would immensely improve upon Israel's technological capabilities. It would also bring Israel into the global running over quantum computing research, alongside countries like the United States, which passed a $1.2 billion fund for research, and China, which has already announced plans for the world's largest quantum research facility at a whopping $10 billion price tag. It's expected to be completed by 2020. The head of MAFAT, or the Israeli Defense Ministry's Administration for the Development of Weapons and Technology Infrastructure, explained that now Israel, which has become a superpower in cyberspace, quote, is looking at quantum as a strategic goal to becoming a major player in the global market, end quote. Towards this goal, the new government spending will be allocated over 5 years, with the majority of it going towards the development of the field itself. Quantum computing, as opposed to how computers work today, uses particles in superposition. This means that rather than processing through bits that represent either a 1 or a 0, we'd be using qubits, which can be a 1, a 0, or both simultaneously. Now it seems that the rest of Hollywood has finally figured out what some of us have already known for years, the power of women, whether as heads of global business or as lead actresses in record-breaking films. Women sort of run the world. And as they always say, numbers never lie. So ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh has more on how women have finally taken over the film industry Emmanuel.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, a new study has just come out that has analyzed over 4 years worth of films and found that female-led movies have consistently outperformed those in which men got the top billing for, which, no offense to you, Aaron, doesn't come as too much of a shock to us women, at this point.
No, I'm not really offended at all. At all. I don't even know what I'm doing here half the time. No, but tell me a little bit more about the study. How many films, did they analyze, and where did they get all this information
Right.
from?
Well, the study itself, which was conducted, by the way, by the talent agency Creative Artists Agency and the tech company Shift7, analyzed 350 top-grossing films worldwide that were released between the years of January of 2014 all the way to December of last year. And basically, like I said before, they discovered that in films with small, medium, or large budgets, all of them averaged better global grosses when a woman was listed as the lead star. Now, the study also found that films that pass the Bechdel test do better as well.
All right, so what exactly is a Bechdel test and how does it work?
Right, okay, so the Bechdel test was invented by the cartoonist Alison Bechdel, which basically rates whether a movie features two female characters talking about something other than a man. So, once again, less shocking than expected, women can actually have a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with men and be liked for it more.
I would say most men would be happy about that.
I'd like to think
women
so.
Weren't talking about that. Okay, so what are some of the movies that they tested that passed the Bechdel test or Bechdel test? I hope we're saying that right.
I hope we're saying that right off.
Yeah.
Right? It's actually, yes, right. So it's actually very interesting. The researchers of the study found every $1 billion film at the box office, such as Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Jurassic World, and Beauty and the Beast, all pass the test and clearly are huge successes, but it's sometimes not that clear to others. A quote from a CIA agent says it all. Women comprise half the box office, yet there has been an assumption in the industry that female-led films were generally less successful. However, he did go on to prove those people wrong by stating, quote, "We found that the data does not support that assumption," clearly.
All right, so, but, what I want to know now is then, who led the study? How was this conceived?
Of course. That was actually my favorite part of this whole story. The study was actually formulated through a group that formed through the Gender Equality Initiative Time's Up. So it's basically, a good group of people working to prove that inequality will inevitably only bring ratings down. So get it together, Hollywood.
Yeah, you tell them.
Yeah.
And if they don't listen to you, maybe they'll listen to this study.
I hope so.
For once, because it hurts their pockets, if nothing else.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that'll be a good catalyst. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, and now for our Hebrew word of the day. It's no surprise that this past year has brought on huge changes for women, especially in the television and movie industry. Female-led films and TV shows have taken over our screens, and let me tell you, we are not mad about it. So that's why today's word is kolnoa, which means cinema or movie theater in Hebrew. By now, you've probably already seen in the kolnoa, Gal Gadot taking over the screen in Wonder Woman. And if you haven't yet been to the kolnoa to see Sandra Bullock starring in Ocean's 8, what have you been doing with your life? But besides the amazing women gracing our kolnoa screens, the truly best part of making a visit to the kolnoa is for the snacks, am I right? Can I get an amen for $15 popcorn? And let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy and cool with a chance of rain, and the low will be around 58 or 14 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect partly cloudy skies and scattered showers throughout the day with a high of about 67 or 19 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.77 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.
Warren Buffett, the world's most renowned investor and a proud Israel bond owner, proclaimed Israel bonds to be a deserved endorsement of a remarkable country. For decades, Israel Bond supporters have expressed their admiration for Israel's achievements through investments ranging from $36 to several million.